Thank you very much, Dawn. And I just have to say, you know, I think many of you know we're undergoing many changes at the division and within the department, and it's really due to, I think, Dawn's leadership since she has come on board. So some of the things that have happened in the past, gosh, only 6 months are just remarkable, and I just want to thank her for her leadership, as I'm sure all of you do as well. I want to just give a few logistical announcements, then make a few remarks that you've heard a little bit about already, and then get into the actual panel presentations. Some logistical, if you do need to leave the room during the taping of the session, if you could use the back exit all the way that way. If you could also avoid the middle row where the filming is actually taking place. And we are actually taping, so if you could keep noise to a minimum so we don't have background noise on the video. And each panel member, I will introduce them as they do their presentation. We are going to hold all the questions till the end. There is a session at the end specifically for questions. So if we just let the panel members talk about the models and their experiences, then once we get through that, we will get into a question and answer period. Things like this really make my job easier. And you know, I think all of us are really trying to look at developing housing in different ways, not the same old kind of models. And I think we have to do that. I think families want us to do that. I think our other state partners want us to do that. Certainly we need to do that for our individuals. So I'm just thrilled to be able to be part of this and be part of this actual taping of the video. And as Dawn said, you know, when we first put the flyer out, when we originally started talking about the day itself, we were hoping to get 30, 40 people. And when we put the flyer out, the response was just overwhelming. And as Dawn said, I think we sold out in 2 days. But the thing to remember most, and Dean said it and Dawn said it, is that the actual purpose of the day is the taping of the video, so that the video will be available as a resource for parents who want to jump in the game and begin to look at housing and developing housing, and maybe in a different way than what we are used to. And I think, you know, we kind of sat back and thought, wow, the response was so great. But, you know, I think it's because we already know that housing is such a near and dear issue to people's hearts, especially for families. And it's complex. You know, it's not easy to develop housing, whether you're a provider or a developer. Just developing housing in general is not an easy task. So the response, I think it just told us everything we already know about housing and the interest that is out there. So as we started to put the day together, we wanted to really assemble a panel of creative and different kinds of options. And you're not going to hear about the typical way that the division has done housing in the past. I think what you're seeing is really a commitment on our part to begin to look at housing differently, and we hope through the day and through the video that families also begin to look at housing differently and begin to look at different models that maybe you may not have thought were ever possible. And when you hear some of the panel members' stories, you might think, wow, I can do this with help and with support, but there are ways to do it. So you will hear from actually one of our developers who worked with a town and a mayor to develop a really unique housing panel. And one of the families here who Tom worked with and is taking part in the housing and benefiting from it will be speaking. And the important thing is there was very little involvement on the state, on our part, and this is a great housing project that you'll hear about. You'll also hear from one of our providers who works with individuals around home ownership. You know, one of our basic dreams as people is just to own a home or have what we can call our own place. And the gentleman who will speak about that will talk about working with individuals with disabilities around being able to realize that dream and actually owning their own home. And most importantly, you will hear from families and 2 individuals who actually created the model, who created the models that worked for them. In one instance, a family actually got together with other families and made the housing work, brought the housing to the table, if you will. And in others, the individuals made it work for themselves. And so I think you're really in for a treat in terms of hearing the different ways that housing has been developed over the past few years. So I don't want to take away from their presentation, but I do want to just kind of frame the discussion and give you 2 kind of tenets that you're going to hear today. And those are supportive housing, the concept of supportive housing, and the concept of shared housing. And as we go through the presentations, as I tell you what those are, and some of you already know what they are, you'll see some common themes around those. So the concept of supportive housing is supportive housing, and the most important piece to that is that the housing is lease-based. The housing is in the individual's name. The lease, the individual actually signs the lease and is subject to tenant and landlord laws as we are. And so the other important piece is the housing is not tied to the services. The third important piece is that there are supportive services attached to the supportive housing. And the way the services work, they're individualized. They're built around the needs of the individual. And they can be adjusted, increased or decreased, depending on the needs. And the point is, if a person's service needs change, they do not have to leave their apartment. They don't have to leave the place where they're comfortable and they know home. I mean, I grew up working within our typical system, and when someone was doing well, we thought, oh, they needed to move to more independence. Well, they're doing well for a reason. So we needed to be more flexible and be able to keep them in the environment where they were doing well and be able to adjust services. And that's really what the concept of supportive housing is all about. And finally, the most critical piece to supportive housing is that it's safe, affordable, and decent. And really, I think you all will agree in terms of the affordability. So that's a quick concept. There's many more. I could talk for hours about supportive housing, but that's just a quick synopsis. The other tenant is shared housing, similar to supportive housing in many ways. But the main component of shared housing is that the family or the individual controls the housing. And that could be they own the house, they rent the house, but the control of the housing is in the individual's, within their purview. The services can be provided by DDD. I mean, you'll see, when we talk about housing, you also have to talk about services, and you will see that in some of the models, DDD is involved heavily in terms of services. Some cases where we have some support involved, and in some we have very little. And so it really runs the gamut. There could be other sources of funding that are involved. And the thing about shared housing that I think people need to start thinking about is the concept of natural supports. And a neighbor might be able to provide some of the assistance, a family member, someone from a person's church, just to begin to look at how can we meet the service needs of the individuals who require the housing. And so with a shared housing model, it could be someone who lives by him or herself with what we call an attendant or a live-in roommate. And in exchange for either a decreased amount of rent or even maybe no rent, there are services that are provided. So if an individual needs somebody to be there during the night, the person who lives in is there during the night. The other model is around more of a group living kind of situation, and that's typically 3 persons or less. And again, the families kind of get together and develop the housing and bring the housing to the table, and then we figure out the services. As in supportive housing, the services are very individualized, they're controlled by the individual, but the housing, again, is the critical piece in that they control it. So that really, I think, kind of puts a little bit of a frame of reference to what you will hear from the presenters. I think it's time now, this is what you came to hear, and I think we need to jump into that and stop these speeches. So I will introduce each panel member as they go. Each panel member has about 7 or 8 minutes, and then, as I said, we will have questions at the end. So our first presenter will be Nancy Delaney, and she will talk about the model that she developed.